Thank you for tuning in. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We hope your experience is fruitful. Please feel free to visit our website to find out how you can join our growing family. While we are loading your experience, please do us a quick favor and hit that like button from whichever platform you're watching or listening on. Also, share so others may enjoy as well. And we hope you would consider hitting that subscribe or follow button so you can check out more of our amazing content. All right, let's start the show.
What's going on, beautiful people? We are back with another episode of Kwame Speaks, and I'm so excited today because I have the amazing, the beautiful, my light-skinned sister from another mister, the incomparable Dr. Danyelle Beal, and we're going to get into some mental health awareness. We're going to get into the importance of why mental health is so important in the entrepreneur life, and so much more right here on Kwame Speaks Live. What's going on, kings, queens, and the entire spectrum in between? It is your boy Kwame, and I am back with yet another episode of Kwame Speaks. I'm so excited, you guys. I know I'm always excited, but I'm extra excited today because I get to have the incomparable Dr. Danyelle Beal. Let me tell you something about the Dr. Beal. Dr. Beal earned her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the Chicago School, shout out to Chi-Town, Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Her dissertation, Trauma and Resilience in Black American Women, began a journey of breaking the stigma of traumatic events that can plague the Black community. Important topic. Simultaneously, Dr. Beal completed her pre- and postdoctoral internship supporting survivors of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and within the LGBTQIA plus community. She earned her master's in teaching deaf and hard. Okay, girl, you better go ahead and look at her resume. Master's in teaching deaf and hard of hearing studies with an emphasis on applied behavioral analysis from National University, and her bachelor's in child development with an emphasis on communicative disorders from California State University, Long Beach. Let me tell you something. She has a resume. Okay, when I tell you that she's degreed, my God. Finally, she also contributed to an anthology titled Phenomenal Woman. We know who that is. And that became a #1 bestseller where she began to discuss her experiences through her own healing journey. Dr. Beal is a highly regarded psychologist, clinical psychologist, and behavior analyst who specializes in developmental disorders and trauma. She is considered a servant leader because she leads with compassion and unconditional regard for anyone who sits across from her. As a trauma survivor herself, Dr. Beal has overcome insurmountable odds that has formed her journey through healing, which she calls heart work. She understands that to truly begin to live a life of intention, one must get to the heart work of their own healing journey. My God, I'm so excited. This incorporates every aspect of a person's environment, and her approach to healing is comprehensive and multifaceted. Y'all, I don't want to talk anymore, okay? Today's episode is entitled Money, Mechanics, and Mental Health. We're going to deep dive into some really, really interesting things. You guys know that the show is all about entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial journey. And I really think that, especially in the past couple of years, my specific entrepreneurial journey has been about really incorporating the importance of mental health and mental health awareness. So I'm super excited to introduce the son, the incomparable, the amazing, the queen herself, Dr. Beal. Hey, Dr. Beal.
Hi, Kwame. You are so wonderful.
shout out to all of those who are in the comments. I will be in the comments live to talk to you guys if you want to contribute any type of commentary. And I'll make sure that Dr. Beal gets any of your messages. So if you have any questions, concerns, please leave it in the comments and support. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Beal, can I just say that I'm just super excited? Because I've been wanting to talk. Okay, listen, I have noticed within, especially with Black entrepreneurs, since the pandemic hit, COVID really has decimated a lot of small and mid-sized businesses and has really affected large and even higher corporate businesses. And so we're all feeling it, right? In some way, shape, or form. We're all feeling economically. The country's feeling it. There's a lot of pain right now. You know, we don't need to go into it, but there's a lot of political issues going on. There's a lot of pain in different countries that we're supporting. There's a lot going on. Everybody's feeling emotions and stuff. And so for me, having a small business or having a mid-sized business, has become difficult for some, right? And I feel like it started with the pandemic. Not blaming it all on the pandemic, but it really did put a dent in a lot of different people's pursuits. And so for me, I was actually really blessed. And I thank God every day because the pandemic actually helped my company, only because we're media, social media, all that stuff, or whatever. And so everybody was going towards that, even though they were laughing at us before saying, oh, social media, is a problem or what have you. And I'm like, okay. So, and look now, I'm not trying to say I told you so.
Right.
My whole thing is, what have you noticed in these times? I don't know if you work specifically with entrepreneurs or if you just work with people in general. What have you noticed in regards to the need for mental health awareness, especially when it comes to our culture and our community?
Yeah, no, I think it's such a good point. And I think I appreciate acknowledging the observable kind of differences, pre-pandemic to now as we're, kind of navigating this new normal.
Yeah.
A couple things that, as you were talking, got brought up were when we first entered into the pandemic, I remember telling my partner, like, if people don't have an understanding of what mental health is, they're going to by the end of this. And this was like, when we had first started at the beginning of March 2020, as I was watching the NBA shut down, right? And as, things that I had on my agenda started to slowly collapsing. And I remember telling him, people are going to be affected by this, right? Without having any other sort of foresight. And we had this really big discussion. And a part of how I show up now lends itself to exactly what I thought during that time frame. And what I mean by that is that the entire world is on fire, I think, as a result of surviving a pandemic in our generation and the long-lasting, I think, psychological effects of the pandemic itself and people who are still affected by COVID. So, for example, I somehow was able to escape contracting it until last October. Actually, to this day, October 24th, I contracted COVID for the first time. And I was like, okay, here we go. We're going to get through this. And we're going to, now I can say that I've caught it. Me and my husband had it for 3 weeks. We were down. We could not function. Like, we were down. He slowly started to get better. I did not. I am still, a year later, exactly to the day, still dealing with the effects of long COVID. That has debilitated my life significantly. I struggle with horrific vertigo, the brain fog, the excessive fatigue. I have not felt good for this entire year. Every single day, I'm at the mercy of the effects of long COVID. So I think about me going through this and thousands, millions of Americans who are struggling and trying to adopt themselves to this new world of people being severely, I think, and exponentially impacted by the stress, right, of just life in general. And so my services now lend itself to just being able to sit in spaces with people where they can show up exactly how they need to show up, right? And I don't think that was a consideration that was made prior to the pandemic specifically. And so as you're, asking this question about this shift in mental health, the reason why I think I've become a space where people can now utilize my resources is because I've operated like this even before the pandemic, right? It just wasn't recognized because we have things to do and you have to meet a certain criteria and you have to show up this way. And I was always pushing against that. But now that people are starting to recognize mental health sensitivities and the need to kind of slow down and create specific and intentional opportunities to just be human, now people are like, oh, maybe Danyelle was onto something, right? And like you were saying, I hate to say I told you so, but that's kind of how I'm feeling post COVID, right? And like I've been functioning like this for 25 years. This isn't new. I'm not new to the game. This is how I've kind of operated. And I've noticed this and that people need this. And now I think the world collectively is really recognizing the need to just slow down and start paying, I think, more intentional attention to people.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point. I think people don't really look at the after effects of COVID. And I know that people would say, well, COVID was so many years ago, but people are still dealing with. We don't know how it's going to mutate. We don't know.
Right.
There's still variants out there. We don't know what's happening. With that. And so there's still things that we need to do, and there's still also trauma from 2020, right?
Yes.
I lost someone very close to me in 2020, and because of COVID, and the Delta virus or the Delta variant rather, was really aggressive and unalived so many people.
Yeah.
But going to and people having to kind of move on and deal with that and navigate how they've lost businesses, homes, people in their lives. There's a lot that has occurred in 2020. And so navigating all of that and still trying to navigate, everyday life as it is in 2023 has been a little difficult for people. And so adding on whatever's going on, like, as far as like Ukraine and as far as like what's going on in the Middle East and as far as like what's happening in our own government, and what's happening with the economy. So all of these factors are playing in the journey and how you navigate in your entrepreneur space. So in your space as a psychologist, what have you noticed has been big target points for corporate people who are having 9 to 5 and choose to go a corporate direction, and also those that you may have encountered that have their own businesses?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is that even though it's not globally being stated, that we're still actively in a pandemic, right? That we're not over, right? We're still having to navigate, even though I think because we're so traumatized, you brought up such a good point, because we're so traumatized by the events of 2020, specifically the lockdown, that people are terrified of going back to that place, right? But there hasn't been space for us to actively deal with some of those traumatizations. And so I think that is impacting people in invisible ways. And now that they're forced to kind of operate, we're still in a pandemic. We still have this looming threat of variants, right? And contracting COVID and the effects of that. And because the world and the economy has moved on from that, this affects people across different demographics, right? And so I think that is compounding along with, some of the other things you said, inflation, right? Like people just cannot afford to live like I just keep saying, the entire world is on fire. And we have looming threats of like societal shutdown, right? And like more divisiveness with everything that's going on in the Middle East. So all of these things are happening, but we can't actively talk about it because we still got to get up. We still got to work. We still got to X, Y, and Z. And so the things that I'm seeing, I work in school districts. I work in, communities across Southern California, specifically impoverished communities, lower socioeconomic communities, Black and Brown communities specifically. And there just is an expectation to survive. And so I can't stop and think about all these things. I can't stop and take care of my basic necessities because I am fighting an entire system. And so I'm seeing that people who have to show up, that they're fatigued, that they're exhausted, that there's low frustration tolerance, because their needs aren't being met. And then entrepreneurs, right, like small business owners, there's still this expectation that we have to sustain this income, that we can't go back to corporate America because that's a disaster in and of itself. And it's like all of these issues are here, but we can't really talk about them. We can't really deal with them. And I'm here just trying to create space to help individuals, right? And I guess corporations, because I have a couple of larger contracts, just getting to the root of being able to be okay with addressing their own needs and figuring out systems to get those needs met. Right. So that might look like, and we can talk about that in detail if that's what you're interested in, how we're adjusting what's on our plate and how we're adjusting kind of societal expectations, our financial needs, right? Like really looking at all of these moving pieces and figuring out how to organize them in a way where we're able to take time in our day to do things that we love to do, right? That we're nourishing our souls, that we're nourishing our spirits. Also, that we're creating spaces where we're demanding a certain, like, no, I'm not doing that thing, right? Like today is a perfect example. Like today is a difficult day for me. And so I thought like I can get up and I can spend an hour putting on makeup and making my hair. But at the end of the day, I have a long day, right? And I want to show up authentically and I want to show up, right, with the little bit of energy that I have. And so like really learning how to have grace and take that permission for myself to say, this is the best I can do, right? And learning how to readjust at any given time, I think is something that we've not always had the privilege of having permission to do. And so those would be some examples of, I think, what I'm seeing and how I'm leaning into the spaces that I'm operating in.
Now you said something super interesting, and I want to before we go into like different ways we can kind of work on this, but you said something that was really interesting. One of the pillars that Pyro Media Enterprises as a whole wants to do is to create spaces, safe spaces for our creatives. That's one of the main pillars of Pyro Media Network, and so that's something that I have always been passionate in, is creating spaces for safe spaces, rather, not just spaces, because we can have spaces for this and Discord and spaces for debate and all this other different things or whatever, but creating safe spaces for people is really, really important to me. And that sometimes we don't do for ourselves. And I noticed that, how am I going to create a safe space for someone else if I don't do it for myself? If I don't allow myself to cry, if I don't allow myself to have a moment, if I don't allow myself to have that self-care time. And self-care doesn't necessarily mean that you're running a bath and having candles.
Exactly.
And all that, right? I want us to get away from all of this, like, self-care is this, self-care is that. Self-care is whatever we feel we need at that moment in time to generate a feeling of goodness and a feeling of rejuvenation and a feeling of safety. And so, but you brought up adaptability. You brought up kind of adjusting and what that looks like for everybody. But I wanted to ask a question that I think is really specific to the Black community. We're taught to keep things in house. We're taught to, if you're sick, just drink some Robitussin, you'll be fine. You know what I'm saying? We have all of these different colloquialisms and different things that we have within ourselves and then within our community that we're taught that sometimes can be very unhealthy, right? That whole thing of keeping your business within the house, like what happens in the house stays in the house, has taught us that we can't express our feelings. We can't express what's going on. And talking back to adults, kids are supposed to be seen and not heard. That also, creates a sense of, we can't have a voice, right? And so, not to say that kids should be disrespectful, but they should be able to express how they're feeling. They're persons too, right? And so we grow up learning that, well, we can't say certain things to adults, or we can't have conversations. We can't, another thing that recently I've noticed, that has been coming up, not in just in the TikTok space, but also in the YouTube space, like just because someone treats you a certain way doesn't mean that they like you. When you tell little girls or little boys, like, oh, they're treating you that way because they like you. No, that's not okay. You're telling
Right.
them that abuse is okay, and that's not okay.
Right.
So my question to you is how does all of these different traumas, especially with our current traumas and things that are going on, within generational trauma, within just environmental trauma, within the traumas that we have to deal with as a Black culture, how do we navigate those different things when we're being told keep things at home, don't go see a doctor when you're sick, don't go to a therapist because all you need is just open up the good book and praise the Lord, and all of these different things.
Yeah.
So how do we better advocate for ourselves, and also how do we better bring awareness to the importance of therapy to our culture?
Yeah. So a couple things. I'm going to back up a little bit and paint a picture. So I think society has a way of making things binary. And what I mean by that is, especially I think society as a whole, and then if we're moving down to a subtext or a subgroup of society, let's say the Black community, there's further kind of expectations. And the way that I like to conceptualize this thought is that oftentimes expectations are set with like thick black Sharpie markers, right? Like these are the rigid lines that you're forced to operate in, right? That's society. And then when you add in the complexity of operating under like the rules of a Black society, of a Black community, of the Black community, that those lines get thicker and more rigid, right? Because we're expected to show up in this space under these conditions, and then we can't do it outside of our community, right? Because there's more harm. And so this creates a complex dynamic. And this is where we move into, engaging in behaviors like code switching, right? To keep us safe, to define safe spaces for ourselves, right? And so this kind of like, if I'm conceptualizing visually, this looks like double dutch, right? Like when do I jump in? When do I jump out? And that creates psychological discomfort. It creates psychological inflexibilities. It creates these kind of rules that we're constantly having to juggle and navigate. That in and of itself lends itself to systemic trauma and racial trauma and cultural trauma, right? So I want to say that. So recognizing those thick, rigid lines is the first piece, acknowledging where and when and how harm is being done. I also want to go back and touch on this piece that you said about self-care, right? That it's not just bubble baths and eating bonbons, and right, because sometimes we don't have access to those things. Sometimes I don't have an extra $20 to go lose myself in a movie, right? Or I don't have the time to shut the bathroom door for an hour and disconnect from my family, right? I also want to, so acknowledging that, but also recognizing that self-care can look like giving yourself permission to be released from like relief, right? Like accessing relief from harmful conditions. So if you're recognizing that you're in this environment and it doesn't feel good, self-care can include relief from that, right? Giving yourself permission to say, I deserve better, or I do not have to endure this condition, right? And so I want to kind of drop that into the atmosphere to consider. And the reason I say that is because it took me a really long time to understand that I can give myself permission to not feel attached to your expectation. I can give myself permission to not conform to fitting into the thick, rigid box that you've outlined for me. I can give myself permission in my Black community and in society as a whole. And so now, and it's taken me a really long time to get to this point, I don't carry around a thick black Sharpie marker, right? Where I'm like trying to fit into these standards. I now have a gray washable Crayola that I'm trying to model, right? And it's not square, or maybe it doesn't even close, right? Like maybe I don't even have to. So when we're talking about safe spaces, specifically, I think we're talking about creating psychologically safe spaces.
Mhm.
And that means that there can be a gray washable Crayola and that you can come in and out as you choose, right? I'm not defining the space, but you're actually defining it. And you get to show up as you can. And I think the way that we get comfortable with that is by modeling what that can look like. And that's the space that I occupy now as a psychologist and behavior analyst, is I've given myself permission to finally say, I'm not showing up in this space the way that you expect me to. This is what makes me feel comfortable. This is what makes me feel safe, right? Me showing up and not having makeup on or doing my hair and with my Adidas tracksuit on, that I can show up and be authentic and give you what you need while still making myself comfortable. So to answer that question specifically, I think we first have to be able to acknowledge the harm, right? Give ourselves permission to not have to meet those expectations,
Mhm.
and then get a clear understanding of what we can do to be able to be our best selves as we show up in that space if we choose to. I hope that made some sense.
That made absolute sense. And you touched on something. I noticed that you write things down. I do the same. So
My brain, this brain fog is no joke, Kwame.
I totally understand. I relate to that. But no, you said something about code switching that resonated with me. And I just was talking to a client of mine, or a potential client rather, and she's having this issue where she's like, she wants to talk about it. She wants to start a podcast that is about Real Housewives of, whatever, Bravo stuff or whatever. And I get that. I understand, because we have a reality TV kind of show or whatever. But I also understand that it's difficult sometimes where, you have to show up one way. Like how I am on Kwame Speaks Live is very different from how I am on Pyro Power Hour, right? And so that doesn't mean I'm two totally different people. It's just that there's an audience that is different on here than that would be different on Pyro Power Hour, right? So we're talking about different topics. Number one, where I have a different audience, that there's a different focus on it. And so oftentimes people get frustrated, because especially what I've noticed with my clients, that they get frustrated because the society tells them they have to be one way. And I think that's been adding to trauma, specifically within the Black community, because we're being told by the church we're supposed to be a certain way. We're being told by society we're supposed to be a certain way. We're being told that if you express yourselves, you're specifically with Black women, that you're being aggressive. That when you are crying, that's as a man, that's a sign of weakness. When you when you're voicing your opinion. I know I'm a New Yorker, so I'm a little louder. That doesn't mean that I'm angry. I'm just talking louder, right? And so I have to, in certain spaces, be very careful on how I articulate things, watch my elevation and my tone, and certain things, and that could be considered code switching. But there is a racial and racist kind of undertone in that, right? And so people don't realize that that's a system. But again, more trauma on top of with. So how would you tell someone, let's use me as an example. I obviously, you see, I'm educated, I have different degrees, I have I operate in different spaces, but I can also take off my earrings if I need to. So,
like, don't get it twisted, don't get confused.
Don't get crazy. Don't let the books fool you, honey. You know what I mean? So how do you navigate someone without, because oftentimes people see that as fake, right? Or people see that as you're not being your authentic self. But this is an aspect of me, right? I'm educated. I love talking in collegiate ways to people with master's degrees, to people with doctorates. You know what I'm saying? So I love having conversations and intellectual conversations. My brother and I are a perfect example. We can have really deep, in-depth conversations intellectually about politics, or about the mechanics of the world, or the systems that are in place. And then we can also laugh and joke about Megan Thee Stallion, or laugh and joke about Cardi B in the same breath, or Joe Budden, as he likes to listen to. Those are, we're still ourselves. We're still human. We're still, I'm still Kwame. He's still my brother. And so how do you tell someone that that's okay, and that doesn't mean that because you have multifaceted parts of you that you're fake, or that you have to be inauthentic to the other aspects?
Yeah. So this goes back to that acknowledgement piece, right? So if I can just give a little bit more context into the example that I was sharing earlier, is that one of the things that I realized was that as I'm trying to fit into this space, right, that I'm a different shape than that space is, right? That I can't even describe what shape I am, but I'm a different shape. And every time that I went into that space, trying to conform to those rules and that system, pieces of me were shaved off. Right. But I had been operating like that for so long that I didn't even recognize. Right. So then when I was outside of the space, right, and I was, say, in a potential safe and I couldn't recognize it and I was being triggered, right? Because I'm activated, right? This thing just kind of happens. And it wasn't until I started recognizing that activation, right, through therapy, that my therapist was helping me identify these different parts of myself that had formed as a result of these traumatic experiences that started in my childhood. So to give it this idea a little bit more structure, when, like, there's little Danyelle, right? There's me. There's little Danyelle who is traumatized, who does not have the skill set, who doesn't have the awareness, who's just vulnerable and susceptible to the environment. But the reason why I present the way that I do now is because Digga, that's another part of me. Digga was the protector. Digga was the one who was like, Danyelle couldn't like scream and use her voice, but Digga's going to. Digga's the one who shows up. She's like, she's from the street. She's the one who lets people know that she's not the one or the two, right? Little Danyelle, people see little Danyelle and they form these opinions. Digga's the one who's going to let you know, right? Like, right? She's flipping tables. And as I've navigated these systems, as I've navigated these really harmful environments, Digga's the one who's plowed through, right? And Digga's the one who got the reputation of being angry and being combative and intimidating and difficult to get along with, right? But little Danyelle was in there, but because of these traumatized kind of, differences in environments, I didn't know how to it was this binary system. Either I'm going to be meek and retreat, or I'm going to show up full force, right? And therapy helped me accept, and this is going to make me emotional, so forgive me, because this was such a critical time in my development, even as a 40-something year, that I could actually hold space for Digga and little Danyelle and all the different parts of my lived experiences, that they can all hold space and move through a space. And so sometimes now, right, Digga helped little Danyelle get through the educational system and get through, right? And now I'm Dr. Danyelle Beal, but that was like the therapy that little Danyelle went through and the healing that little Danyelle went through. And when Digga needed to show up, she did, to support Danyelle through that. And now I'm at a place where Digga's always there, right? Digga's in my back, but she doesn't lead. She's always there to show up when Danyelle needs support. But learning how to bring all of the different aspects of who I am into a space and use critical decision making to decide what's going to get me through this environment, right? So oftentimes I have to tell myself, like, you're safe. This isn't a threat. It's a perceived threat, right? But Danyelle, you have the coping skills. You know how to use your education to say things the way that you need to say them, right? Or maybe I'm talking to someone where Danyelle, no one's going to understand Danyelle. Digga needs to come up and translate this, right? And so I think, to answer your question, that was a long-winded way of me saying this. It's really that acknowledgement piece, acknowledging the harm, acknowledging your parts and how you're functioning in that environment, how you're impacting that environment, recognizing those variables, deciding what's yours, deciding what's not yours, really making a clear definition of who you are and who you're not, And then setting expectations for yourself, not anyone else. So I used to go into environments thinking, you owe me this, right? Because I can't take another environment not supporting my needs. And in therapy, I learned very quickly and very kind of, I have a Black therapist who checks me, and she's like, that's not their responsibility to control your responses. It's yours.
Yes.
And once I learned that, I was able to then make more critical decisions about who's showing up. And I realized Digga doesn't need to be the one. That Danyelle, little Danyelle specifically, has really learned how to sit in the space and take the hits and then decide what is she going to address because it's appropriate versus what she's continuing to heal, right? Because
I love that.
Does this make sense at all?
Absolutely. First of all, yes. Because I resonate with that. Digga me Kwamisha me Digga. I get it. So I overstand in that situation. But one of the critical things, and we do have to go to commercial. Oh my God, that was just it's validating. It's encouraging, and it's relatable what you just said, because in my therapy journey, one of the things that I learned very early on is that, especially in my grief counseling, was it's not their responsibility how you react to someone else, to how you react, period. Right? So, you're responsible for your own triggers. You're responsible for how you show up in the world. Other people can do other things, say other things, or whatever, but you're responsible for what you allow to trigger you, how you trigger, and if you do trigger and it's an uncontrollable trigger, and I say that in air quotes, how you navigate and how you behave is really up to you, right?
Yeah, and as specifically to your question, it's really about accepting, acknowledging the harm, right? All those variables, and accepting all those different parts, and then being able to make a choice about how you're critically thinking your way through that particular environment, right? That we're not overgeneralizing these responses, but that in this space and in this moment, because I've taken time to identify who I am and who I'm not, now this is the version of me that you get. Not even the version, but this is the snippet that you get of me, right? And it's appropriate for this context versus this part of me, right? This other personality trait or type or whatever can now show up in this environment based on this context, right? And I think that's the key to kind of being able to give yourself permission to show up as you need to for that context.
Yes. Oh my God. Now you said critical thinking, and I want to talk about that after the break. First of all, you're such a blessing. That's all I'm gonna say. You really are. You really don't even understand how this was an on-time conversation. So shouts out to you, Dr. Bill. But y'all, stay tuned. We're gonna be back with more Dr. Bill. We're gonna talk about critical thinking and what that means. And we're gonna actually discuss a little bit more about what Dr. Bill is doing and how what she's doing can help you in your journey, and if you're an entrepreneur, just all around the need for just having mental health services. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
In a world filled with diversity, where radical faith and progressive believers come together, there's a place that's breaking all boundaries and embracing believers from all walks of life. Flight Radio, where believers unite, boundaries break, and love triumphs. Step away from the chaos and noise of your daily life. Experience moments for yourself that are calm, serene, and full of peace. A necessary respite to foster growth within you, because self-care should be luxurious. Lux and Noir.
we're black by popular demand. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you are just tuning in, do me a quick favor, hit that like button, share, and subscribe. That's right, subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can subscribe to either Kwame Speaks Official or to Pyro Media Network, or both. We appreciate it. And if you feel so inclined, go ahead and bless me with a love offering, if you will. Cash App, Kwame C86, and that's and paypal.me/K Corbett, and that's with 2 T's and the number 1. All right. And we also want to make sure we shout out, if you're not getting notifications from YouTube or Twitch, you can go ahead and get direct notifications from Pyro Media Network when we go live and when we upload by texting Blaze, BLAZE, to 833-793-2423. And we want to also shout out all of our amazing sponsors: Bullet and Flight Radio, our sister radio station, the #1 progressive Christian and inspirational radio station in the world, and Lux and Noir, my candle company. Shout out to them. So if you're looking for some self-care needs, you can head over to luxandnoir.com. All right, we're back with Dr. Beal, y'all. Listen, I am just in awe. a lot of the conversation, you guys know, when I get into conversations with people and they hit stuff, it's just, beautiful things. We talked about so much in the beginning. So if you're just tuning in, make sure you catch the replay. If you're listening on Bullet and Flight Radio, make sure you check out all of the stuff that is happening right there on the replays on Bullet and Flight Radio. You can go ahead and check out the podcast, their podcast network, or you can go over to pyromedianetwork.com as well and check out the replays as well. But yes, Dr. Beal is in the building. She is a clinical psychologist and behavioral analyst, and she has a couple of websites. And I say a couple because you know how some people have one. She has 2. Tell us a little bit about Loving Hands, excuse me.
Yeah, and I will say that I have purchased your candle, Lux Noir, and it is wonderful. The smell is wonderful. It lights like beautifully. I think I bought 2 different kinds, and it is beautiful. I set the tone, and it sets the occasion for the mood. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Thank you so much. I don't even think I turned on my. I have a couple of. I think. Did I turn it? Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
It's over there. Lux and Noir is over there. But thank you, Dr. Rick. He's a huge supporter of Lux and Noir. Definitely check it out. But yes, tell us a little bit about Loving Hands.
Yeah, so Loving Hands is the LLC that I started in 2015. And this really started because I have been working in my field of behavior analysis since 1998. So at this point, a little over 25 years. I started in this field as a teenager, and someone like me who has a history of traumatization throughout my childhood and throughout my lifetime found myself entering systems and environments where I didn't understand the culture, right? Or the expectations that were being set of me. And I was forced to conform, right? This is kind of my lived experiences and how I learned the things that I know now. And these systems were not supportive of what I needed and how I needed to operate. So oftentimes I was misunderstood, I was mislabeled, I was described in ways that were completely inappropriate to my intentions of being, right? And because I couldn't conform in ways, I received a lot of punishing contingencies, right? Lots of reprimands, lots of just stressful kind of working conditions. And so as a result of that, once I became board certified, I decided to open up Loving Hands, really primarily to create safe psychological safety for clinicians of color. People who need to navigate the workspace, this field specifically in behavior analysis, with supportive supervision and mentorship opportunities. I also wanted to support Black and Brown families across Southern California in being able to receive services in a way that supported psychological safety of their own, right? And that looked like them being able to define the treatments that were appropriate for their families, right? They weren't going to be judged because of their kind of cultural stuff that came up, right? That they were going to work with professionals who understood the intricacies of how they operate as a family, within a system, within a community. That doesn't happen a lot in my field of study, which is a sub-study of psychology. And so that's where Loving Hands was birthed from. And so since 2015, We have made a pretty significant impact across Southern California. And now, really, I focus on leadership opportunities with Black and Brown clinicians. I focus on safe de-escalation for our Black and Brown children who grow up to be Black and Brown men who then become a threat to society. And so I teach really safety escalation. How can we safely get our sensitive members of society back into baseline, a healthy state of being where they're not in crisis without police intervention, without force, without harmful interventions? And so I do that across the state. I also provide ethical repairing violations that our scientists receive. So as organizations, it's easy to divert from ethical considerations or our ethical guidelines. And so I help people get back in good standing with our board, that we can do good work, we can be ethical while doing it, and we can protect the dignity of our clients and clinicians that work for us. And so that's what Loving Hands does.
Shout out to Loving Hands. And what is the website? I don't have it on there. Forgive me. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So it's www.lovinghandsca.com.
Right on. And I wanted to make sure that they heard it on those who are going to listen to this on Bullet and Flight Radio. Loving Hands with an S.com.
Loving Hands with an S, CA.com.
CA, perfect. All right, thank you so much for that. And then also, as far as your other website, which is danyellbeal.com, could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so similar, same things, but I found that outside of the LLC that really focuses on employees who want to kind of work with certain families, that people, specifically women of color, were coming to me and just wanting mentorship or growth in certain areas. It started with kind of the book. People would read my portion of Phenomenal Woman, and then they would just ask me to support them in their own journeys. That led to them working for companies that needed more, I think, knowledge about creating environments for the safety and protection of Black women specifically. So I'm going to just put in this information. My dissertation is the effects of trauma and resiliency in Black American women. And what came out of this research study was that Black women who have been traumatized often have to grow up, similar to what we've been talking about this whole hour, and move and operate in environments that don't support their psychological safety. They don't understand how Black women show up in these spaces who have been traumatized and how they're susceptible for more trauma, right? And so my dissertation kind of explores this. And a part of where this website came from was women saying, I don't know how to work through the intensity of my lived experiences and then force myself into this box that's been outlined for me. And so this is kind of a subsidiary of sorts of specifically getting to heart work, specifically getting to a woman's needs and helping her get to a place where she wants to in her career and her personal life, right? So Black women specifically are the most disproportionately affected in our society. And that's why this has kind of been a really passion project. So this website just focuses on, I think, the specifics of healing and growing for Black women, and which has turned into companies, organizations, just spreading my research across different levels of understanding.
Right on. Now, as far as one thing that I wanted to talk about, as far as like critical thinking was concerned, because I know that that's some of the things that you're targeting in your conversation with professionals. Now, these particular professionals you're talking about, like people who are in corporate, or are these entrepreneurs, or all of the above?
All of the above. Yes. It started out as just women reaching out, and it's now expanded to, like, I've really had to redefine my business model. And so I'm still kind of working out the fine tuning of those details, but my business model now includes some of this aspect that we're talking about.
Right on. So as far as all of this, where do you see yourself in the next 10, 15 years doing this work? Where do you hope to achieve? What are some of your goals for both your organizations and just overall you?
Yeah, I'm hoping that I expand people's let me try to articulate this in a succinct way. I'm hoping that I start to expand people's understanding
Mhm.
of how they impress unfair expectations on other people. So
Hmm.
what I'm really hoping is to create environments and systems that stop operating under those thick, black, rigid lines,
Mhm.
right? That I'm disseminating my research and that I'm disseminating being able to model behaviors that look like acceptance, right? For sensitive communities. So when, I know you were wanting to know about the critical thinking piece.
Mhm.
It's that piece that we stop kind of conforming to these robotic kind of standards that we're on this conveyor line doing absolutely all consuming, right? And one of
Yeah.
the things that I've learned in the past 3 years is that if I can't share my story and my lived experiences, then I'm allowing another person to believe that they can't either. And the biggest thing that I've learned in 3 years is that every time I get up and I do this and I just open my mouth and talk, that someone sees, oh my gosh, she did it. I can do it too. And that's what I'm hoping I continue to perpetuate over the next 10 years is that I expand my research in such a way that people start to understand that people can be different, that they do not have to conform, that they can show up with their own rules and their own systems, and that these environments help make a way to include them in their space, right? And I'm hoping to be able to model that, not just on a one-to-one level, but on a one-to-many level and a systemic level. And so that's what my work has been focused on these past 3 years, and what I've been working on disseminating is creating these systems that say, okay, you're in this space. Now let's talk about what this space looks like instead of coming
Yeah.
into a space that's already been defined.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, and just the feeling of finding your voice and knowing that there's other voices like it, right?
Yeah.
That's super important, and just kind of um, knowing that it's okay to share your voice and not
Yeah.
allowing others to control your voice or control the
Yes.
narrative of your voice, right?
Yeah.
And showing up 100% authentically you, whether people like it or not.
Yeah. And, I lost my train of thought with that critical thinking piece, right? Like understanding the connection between like your inner brain. I won't use like big terms, but understanding the connection with your inner brain, which dictates those responses, right? Like you've heard of flight or flight, you've heard of, right? So recognizing that this is my body reacting because it thinks I'm in danger, and
Yeah,
your critical thinking brain is in the forefront of your brain, and this is the piece that's saying stop,
right.
breathe, think, come up with a game plan,
Hmm.
right? So what I'm hoping on an individual level is that we become aware ourselves of that connection between our inner brain and our forefront brain, and that we're working on what we're responsible for,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
as I'm helping people do that, then going to the environment and asking them to use their critical thinking,
Hmm.
right? And being able to say, like, okay, I recognize that you're working really hard to be in this space. Let me take some of that burden off of you just a little bit so that you can
Yeah.
breathe and you can actively work through that. Right. And so that's kind of where I am in the midst of what I'm disseminating, is helping people individually and systemically,
Hmm.
because we've got to shift. Like we're on fire, everyone's on fire. And I think recognizing that, and as I've learned this through these past 3 years, I wouldn't have ever been here if Tasha Champion wouldn't have asked me to contribute to that anthology. I never would have anticipated that people would hear my story and say, oh my God, right? And the outpour, I'm going to get emotional, of like love and support for people just validating me being
Yeah.
my fumbly bumbly self, right? And through that process, I was able to learn how to just tact and acknowledge what it is and lead with that, right? I'm going to show up
Yeah.
nervous. I'm going to show up anxious. I'm going to show up who I am. And if this space wants me, they're going to have to accept that, right? And so, that I think is what I want to like leave, the audience with, is this idea that you can give yourself permission to not be perfect and to not conform to those society standards. But if you're going to do that, make sure that you've done some of this internal work to define what that is then, right? So that you're not susceptible.
And I'm glad that you said that. Before we close out, because I definitely want to do two things. I want to make sure we shout out the Phenomenal Woman book, which is, as you guys know, the Phenomenal Coach herself, Tasha Champion, does promote on her channel. But there are multiple authors on this anthology, so definitely check out Dr. Beal's portion as well. You can go to you can go to danyellbeal.com/media to be able to get that on there. So for those who are listening on Bullet in Flight Radio, that's DANYELLEBEAL.com/media. But take a look at the whole website. It's a really good website. Well done. But yes, you're welcome. But I wanted to talk to you about something about leaving kind of a lasting impression from a Black psychologist to people who may be on the fence with seeking mental health services, people who have listened to our community say you don't need mental health services, you just need Jesus, which in culmination, I'm a believer myself. So I definitely believe that you absolutely need Jesus in your life. That's my belief. But at the same time, I think Jesus and God didn't create or did not have like therapists out in the world for them to just sit down and looking at the wall. They're there for, psychology and science is there to help us apply and life.
The application,
application of life. So for those who are on the fence, or those who are resistant, for those who are scared, for those who may be, whether it be fear of what other people may think, whether it be fear of being labeled crazy, which I hate that word, when it comes to discussing this, but all of those things that are barriers and resistance to seeking mental health services, what would you say to them?
I would say, again, I know I sound repetitive and forgive me, but I think this is so vital. And I think because we tend to gloss over this part, is really understanding, again, where you've been harmed, right? And coming to terms with like where you learned that thing, right? And whether or not it serves you. Yeah. Right. So this idea that like we're not supposed to like talk about in-home stuff outside with someone else, right? Like that's a big part of the culture. Ask yourself, does that serve you? Does this belief that I've attached myself to, does this rhetoric that is constantly playing in my head, does it serve me? And if it doesn't, then my recommendation would just be to extend yourself and become uncomfortable trying something else and putting on something else to see if that maybe serves you. It's okay that you don't have the answers. It's okay that you don't have a solution about how to feel better, but get outside of what you've been taught, challenge kind of what you've been taught, think about whether or not it serves you. And if it doesn't, then just start trying on different things. I would say I think everyone needs a therapist. I'm also a believer. And for many, many years, I was told that God was supposed to supply everything I needed. And it wasn't until I got clear where I was like, I need something tangible. Right? Like I believe in God with my whole heart, but like I in this moment, I'm going to lose my crap. I'm going to lose everything, right? I'm going to flip this table and I'm going to lose my crap. And I realized, and I gave myself permission to believe that I deserve something tangible. Yeah. I deserved someone that I can actually talk to help tell me that I'm not crazy, to help validate my experiences, right? But it wasn't until I gave myself permission and I asked myself, does this serve me? And it didn't, right? And so that's, I think, what I would be encouraging of is just figure out and determine whether this belief or thought or concept or rhetoric is actually giving you what you need. And if it's not, look out someplace else. I think every person needs a therapist. I still have a therapist. I'm at the top level of therapy. I still have a therapist that I talk to every single week because I need someone who I can work through the complexity of the things that I'm going through. And I think if you're a Black woman or a Black man specifically, I know there's a small percent, there's 4% of people working in my field, but find a Black therapist, right? I think the nuances and the intricacies and the specificities of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis can't be matched without someone who acknowledges those things. And so that would be my consideration to offer.
And I know it's hard, but like, because I know I had a really difficult journey finding a right fit.
Yes.
For me, and I'm really blessed with my last two therapists, my current therapist and the one before. You moved. I'm so mad at you about that. But my sense of peace, my feeling of desiring to move forward, my sense of purpose, it's really kind of my perspective.
Yes, your perspective, such a big one.
Really, it's a huge thing. It's really adjusted. I'm able to tackle things a lot better. I'm able to navigate things a lot better. I still have a long way to go. I'm not perfect, right?
Yep.
I'm still fairly young, and I know that I have a journey to go. And I pray that God sees me, 20, 40 more years, what I'm saying, on this earth. So, and then some. Keep me as long as you need me here. Thank you. but my purpose and my point in saying all of that is that regardless of what you believe in, who you believe in, mental health is an investment, investment in self.
Absolutely.
And I think as Black people, we don't often invest in ourselves because we're taught to be worker bees.
Yes.
If you can put money into Gucci, if you can put money into Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever you're wearing, whatever name brand that you're wearing, I think you can put some money into investing in your mental health.
The development.
Development, and so I a lot of it, don't get me wrong, I think self-help books are great. I think I listen to them all the time. I have a bunch of different ones. I have the Phenomenal Woman, which I've read, in my library. So I have a bunch of different books. I think that the Bible is very important. But I do think that having practical a physical person in space and really acknowledging and understanding how brain works and how to navigate emotion and behavior, that's super helpful. So regardless if you take it from me or you take it from the incomparable Dr. Beal, please take the advice of finding somebody for yourself, even if it's a counselor. Start the journey in some way, shape, or form. There are many different programs out there. There's state-funded programs. There are federally funded programs. There's not really an excuse nowadays for you not to at least have at least 3 sessions. Have 3 sessions and do what you do with Netflix and Hulu. You change your email and get the free trial. Keep doing it until you get it until you find a good fit. I'm just saying, throw it out there. That's what I did. I'm going to be real about it. I started out before, I didn't realize that the VA would pay for all of it. So I just went ahead and said, okay, can I get this 3 free sessions, 5 free sessions or whatever, until I found someone that and he was like, you actually have the VA, right? And I was like, yeah. They can pay for it. Oh, really? So it helps. It helps.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I was just going to add to that. And I think, as you're exploring this process and working through maybe that kind of conflict that you might be engaged in, again, knowing who you are and who you are will help navigate through that process so that you're able to better define whether or not it's a good fit or not, right? Because once you kind of establish yourself and your values and who you are, then you're able to more easily recognize this isn't the person for me. And then again, giving yourself permission to move on and move through, right? For the purpose of finding who's going to meet your needs. Yes.
And that goes across the board. If you don't feel comfortable with your PCP, your primary care provider, your actual
Yep.
doctor, move on. You'll find that there's plenty of doctors out there. There's plenty of Black therapists out there. I mean, I wish there was more, but you know, there's a smaller percentage of them out there. But my point is that they're out there. And so there's a way to do it. And even if you have to start out with someone who it may not be a Black therapist, starting the journey, just getting past that hurdle of like of what society has told us, what our community has told us, really does help. So I thank you so much, Dr. Bill. I have to have you on again.
Yes, absolutely. Anytime, Kwame. I am eternally like at your call. Absolutely.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. Look at it. Y'all see that? I have a doctoral clinical psychologist here on my call. You know what I'm saying? Y'all can have one too. She might become Pyro Media's psychologist.
Hello. Let's speak that into existence.
Right. Our psychology commentator. You know what I'm saying?
Our resident psychologist.
Right. Yes. But thank you so much, Dr. Beal. I appreciate you. You guys make sure that you check out drbeal.com, or excuse me, Danyelle. I keep saying Dr. Beal. danyellbeal.com. That's DANYELLE. BEAL.com. And then also make sure that you check out Loving Hands CA, and that's with an S, Loving Hands with an S, CA, as in California.com, if you are looking for those services as well. And don't forget also, you guys make sure that you subscribe. It does help the algorithm. So thank you so much for subscribing, whether you're subscribing to Pyro Media Network or subscribing to youtube.com/Kwame Speaks Official. This is an older slide. It's supposed to be Kwame Speaks Official. So make sure you check it out. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you join the hotspot, which is Pyro Media's Patreon. It's only $5 a month. 18 and older, of course, but there are Patreon exclusive gifts and also special episodes and things and content that is specific to our peeps and our pyromaniacs. And shout out to Lux Noir, my candle company. If you are looking for self-care needs, candles, body butters, all of that stuff, definitely head over to luxnoir.com. We are growing each week, adding new scents, adding new things for you guys to check out. And you can follow me on all social media platforms at Kwame Speaks Official. I try to keep it simple. Also, if you are a planner, if you need somebody who to help organize your professional development or your personal development, if you need help organizing your life, I am a planner boy. So I love helping people with their scheduling, helping them build their life to a happy planning life. Okay. You can shout me out over there at kwamespeaks@outlook.com if you need it, or you can contact info@pyromedianetwork.com and they'll get you all together at the KC3 agency. All right, you guys, that was a lot to talk about. Thank you guys so much for joining. Again, Dr. Bill, bless your heart. Thank you so much for being here. And you guys, remember, today is a great day to have a great day. So create one. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.